Jim, you ready to record another trash movie bonanza?
Yo, Trope Master C. This ain't no movie review show today. I'm recruiting you into my deadly new violence gang out there on the streets.
Violence gang?
That's right.
Jim, that's a T-square you've got there.
I know, buddy. I don't actually have any weapons. I draw comic books. I have a deadly knife. I have a deadly knife, Trope Master.
That looks to me like an X-Acto knife. Am I seeing that right?
You're right. You're right, buddy.
Hey, it's a good effort, but tell you what, let's just talk about violent vigilante movies this week.
Sounds great. Jamie?
That sounds great. So Jamie, kick it.
Trash Movie Bonanza with your hosts, Jim and Chris.
Hello, folks. Welcome to the trashiest episode yet of Trash Movie Bonanza. I don't know why I'm saying that, but my name is Chris. I'm one half of the host of this show, a show where two buddies make each other watch B movies. My name, as I say, is Chris. I host a show called Comic Tropes, but with me, as always, is my pal.
Whoa, Jimmy Jam's ex-gang member and current freelance illustrator, comic book artist. And Chris, we
working
did
on a vigilante comic. Am I
I know.
Incorrect?
I was gonna say, and I'm gonna promote that at the end of the show, if that's okay with you.
Yeah, let's do that.
But man, we are definitely putting the trash in the title of the show this week, because these are glorious, just vigilante punker 80s movies. You can't go wrong.
Doesn't it feel like a very 1980s thing, the way that they present sort of like gang violence in the 1980s?
Yeah.
You like the gangs are tend to be very diverse for some reason. They're not like, say, like a white supremacist gang, or you know, like an inner city, like, you know, it's not the Bloods and the Crips. It's like this rainbow coalition of gang members with always like some sort of variation on a mohawk or something like that.
Completely, man. And just the fashion styles. And also with both these movies and with like we watched Night of the Comet, and there was like a gang in the mall of ghouls. And I noticed with all these 80s movies that feature punks, the punks are never like level-headed, subtle evil. They're like over the top, clownish, like Joker, laughing hyena, wild man, exaggerated, annoying punks, so that when they do get killed, you don't care. You want them to be murdered. They're very annoying characters.
I would agree with you. Yeah, they act like they're high on something, although I don't think in either of these movies we actually see the gangs doing drugs. I don't know. Maybe it's like hinted at off screen. You know, they're high on tobacco cigarettes.
Yes. In Death Wish 3, they're doing lines of like cocaine and stuff. Well, and so there's weird hideout, but you know.
I talked over you. I'm such a bad co-host. I'm such a jerk. Look at me talking over Jim. We're
both
two
excited.
movies.
We're both excited about these incredible movies.
Because we're talking about vigilante movies. Movies where just ordinary people take the law into their own hands, and you see that one person can make a difference. And I say person, not man, because maybe you want to start with your choice.
Yes. Linda Blair, 1984. My pick is Savage Streets.
Had you seen this one before, I guess?
Yeah, I've seen this a couple times, and that's why when I was watching it on YouTube last night, waiting to the very last minute, you could tell that it
was not the right one.
I was like, something's missing. And then thank God you saved the day, because you were like, no, dude, here's the uncensored version, because the version of this movie is filled with nudity, more nudity than actual like gore and violence.
Not that much violence in a way. Although I read that it was originally rated X. but you know what? In the mid 80s, the MPAA started getting really strict about what they allowed. I remember like our horror movies briefly got really tamed down in like the mid to
Yes.
late 80s.
Yeah. And speaking of
Yeah,
horror,
Savage
man,
Streets. It's interesting to me because I've only really seen Linda Blair in The Exorcist 1 and then 2. She was a little grown up, but like, you know, I'd never seen her in this sort of like very adult role.
oh yeah. Yeah. I mean, she actually did a bunch of B movies in the 80s. And before I forget, I wanted to mention that Danny Steinman directed this movie, and
Yep.
he directed Friday the 13th Part 5, the
Right.
sleaziest of the Friday the 13th movies, with the most nudity, the most crazy kind of gonzo
You know
stuff
what?
going on.
That's a
And
good
he's
point, Jim. Like that movie is sincerely, you're right. Like that is, it feels almost like a porno version of
Yes.
Friday the 13th.
It's by far the sleaziest of
Yeah.
the Fridays. And this guy also directed like, you know, straight up porn. So it's not
Oh, I
surprising
didn't know
that
that.
there's, yeah. So it's not surprising that there's like gratuitous scenes of like numerous naked girls in the shower and girls getting their tops torn off. And,
Right.
you know, there's, both of these movies have assault scenes on women, I guess we'll call it.
Yeah, I know. Just
and
for like the YouTube stuff, like, and it's definitely my least favorite. Of course it is. Like, it's just, it's kind of unnecessary. Like,
Yeah.
I get it, but even if it has to be the motivating factor in these stories, you don't need to show as much of it as you do. Like in
Right.
both movies. It's weird. The 80s had such a different take on some of this stuff.
Yeah. I mean, they really wanted to nail it into the audience's skull that like, we have to give this motivation to our protagonist, our vigilante. Something just terrible has to happen. And it's like, well, no shit. I mean, Jesus, it's like you're showing us these horrific things. And I guess I should mention before we go further with Savage Streets, the basic, since we're talking about it, the basic plot of this movie is
premise.
Linda Blair is named Brenda. She's the leader of this all-girl gang called the Satins. Takes place in LA. Linda has a little sister named Heather who's deaf and mute. Heather gets assaulted by this punk gang that's hanging around the school. And, you know, make a long story short, Linda Blair, aka Brenda, goes on a murderous rampage against this punk gang. That's the plot. That's the basic gist of it.
It's a pretty small gang, the bad guys. I mean, it's technically 4 guys, although we'll sort of talk about it. One of them is more like a nerdy initiate that like never is quite part of the gang.
Yeah.
Both gangs are a little funny. Yeah. There's the Scars who drive around in like, you know, a nice, like, I think late 50s or early 60s, like convertible. And then the Satins, who are sometimes in a group gang outfit, but mostly not.
Yeah. And dude, I do love the fashion of the girls in this movie. It's like just aesthetically, as I'm drawing my characters, female characters, I'm always looking at that kind of thing. And like some of the outfits in both of these movies are just like outrageous shit, man. Like
the movie starts with like a kid, the nerdy kid in the gang putting on some camo and like leaving late at night. And his dad's like, you know, you can't leave. But of course we can't see him because he's in camo.
Yes. He literally changes into his punk outfit before he meets his punk friends.
They pick him up for like a play date.
Yeah. Yeah. And it's great, man. The beginning of this flick has all these awesome shots of the girls strutting down Hollywood Boulevard.
Right.
I lived in LA for a long time, and I have these kind of like affiliations with like, oh, I know that street. I know that shot. Oh, there's Musso and Frank's in the background. There's this army supply store there, you know, so you get this real
an army
LA
supply
flavor.
store, Jim. I hate interrupting you, but like the army supply store that the girls like glance at, and it has things like gigantic bear traps and crossbows and stuff like
Yes.
right in the front window, like these super dangerous weapons. I've been to army surplus stores and it's like it's hats and
Yeah.
slacks, you know what I mean? Or maybe
Yeah.
holsters. I've never gone in one and seen like, weapons right up front.
Right. Right. Chris, you mean people that live in LA aren't going like bear hunting in their neighborhood?
I know, right?
It's a common thing.
Using their crossbows to just take out pigeons? I don't even know what you guys have in LA.
Right. Right. It's so it right off the bat, we're established with like the city, the world, the two different gangs.
It's cool.
And it's also established how protective Linda Blair, aka Brenda, is of Heather. Heather's like this sweet, innocent girl dressed in like a cute little dress, and the rest of the girls are like, punker kind of style.
Yeah.
And it's beaten over your head very blatantly that like, oh, Heather's the innocent and
she looks like she's ready for Sunday school at church.
Exactly.
Although actress Linnea Quigley, pretty famous scream queen, plays Heather, and she is, I think, a year or two older than Linda Blair.
It's funny.
It is.
Yeah.
She's playing the younger sister, but she's technically older. I loved this opening bit. I don't want to dwell on like every moment, but I'm watching it and it seems super familiar to me, and it took me a minute to realize why. And it was the opening song, which is "Nothing's Gonna Stand in Our Way," performed by, I believe, John Farnham. But I'm a kid that grew up watching the Transformers cartoon movie like a million times, and there was a cover of that song.
No
Nothing's
way.
Gonna Stand in Our Way. So I know that song so well. Yeah, it's kind of funny. It was covered by like a hair metal band called Kick-Axe, but I guess that name was too offensive to put on like a kid's CD. So they performed under like the fake band name of Spectre General for like 2 songs. But yeah, Nothing's Gonna Stand in Our Way. I'm super familiar with that song, and it like took me a minute. I'm like going like, why does this sound so why is this all familiar? Have I seen this movie? And then I realized, oh no, it's the song. I know this song like very well, but from something else. It took
That's
me a
cool.
minute.
That's awesome. Anytime you can cross over with Transformers the movie, it's a good thing.
But it's kind of funny because I think Transformers was made like the following year or something like that. So they must have been like, this is the song.
Yeah. That's incredible.
Some producers watching this movie of like teenagers getting killed and stuff and going like, but they've got a killer song that needs to be in a transforming car movie.
Yes.
That's
this will easily translate to this animated feature. But yeah, I mean and in the beginning, we're introed to the idea that like Brenda and her gang they know about the Scars, the guy gang, and they have this kind of encounter with them where the Scars almost run over Heather, the innocent Linnea Quigley character. And we immediately get Brenda like talking shit to Jake, the leader of the Scars.
Hey, look, Brenda, we say me and you, we get together, we have a little party, huh? How's that sound to you?
Almost as good as drowning in a pool of vomit. Yeah.
So it's established right off the bat, like, these are the two groups we're going to follow in the movie. This is the rivalry. This isn't rocket science, how this is all going to play out. It's pretty obvious.
But don't you think that it escalated like ridiculously fast, all things considered? Because the girls basically, they see their car and they joyride it and cover it in trash to get revenge on them almost hitting Heather. But then from there is like when the Scars just take it like to the nuclear option, which is just bonkers.
Yeah. It's an overreaction to say the least. It's like, oh shit. And I mean, so after that, we're in the high school with the girls and they're in like the weirdest aerobics gym class ever.
Very strange.
It's like an excuse to have some 80s aerobics. I don't know.
And just like, I think just put the girls in sort of skimpy clothing and have them stretching and bending. And
yeah. Now I will give a shout out, Chris, to Stevie is wearing a Specials shirt, that the band, the Specials, the ska group, which in that scene, I was like, being a music fan, I'm like, the Specials, that's a deep cut for the 80s. That's awesome.
That is cool.
So, and then there is Brenda's rival at school is a blonde, hot cheerleader named Cindy.
Right. I totally for a minute forgot that she has the bitchy rival at school because she's so unimportant overall to the plot. She's there, but not important to the story.
And dude, like her and Brenda's rivalry throughout the movie has no payoff. There's scenes of them as rivals. They're fighting in the shower. There's, girls getting their shirts ripped off, like I said, but their story doesn't have any sort of conclusion
you sort of
payoff.
Brushed past like a part that I consider funny there, Jim. Yes, they start fighting in the shower, and then two other naked girls in the shower, just extras, not
in the
like
background,
the supporting cast. They're just also fighting, just so that we've got extra boobs in the scene.
It's
so perfunctory.
Yeah. So and before that, after the girls are done with their weird gym class, Heather visits and, is sitting and waiting for Brenda. The girls go into the locker room and there's this totally blatant, panning shot just across the shower of like all these naked girls. And then it gets to Brenda and her gang and they're kind of putting their clothes on and talking about one of the characters, Francine, is getting married. So that's set up that one of the girls, she's pregnant. And
she's getting married young, but she's happy about it. And the girls are happy for her. She's with a good guy.
Yeah. And it's, dude, the trope of these movies too is anytime you're introduced to a character, usually one of the young women that has something going on good in their life, it's like, oh shit,
they're
that
doomed.
Is gonna die.
They're so doomed. They might as well have had that tattoo, like doomed.
Yes.
I mean,
very obvious, man.
A lot of stuff is spelled out in here, but we're kind of here for the fun, and there's a style to it all. I'll give it that.
Yeah.
And it moves at a decent pace. You would think it doesn't, because like really the revenge piece is just the third act, not the whole movie. But it kind of moves at a good pace.
Yeah. There's a lot of like back and forth with the two gangs like fucking with each other. And we can kind of jump around a bunch, but like, well, I guess the dark event that happens here after the gym scene, the shower scene, Heather's on her own and the punks,
all four of them
recognize her and drag her into the bathroom. And that's where, the terrible assault happens. But that's the catalyst, obviously, for like all the shit.
They forced the nerdy guy to go first. I don't know how you could perform like that. I mean, but whatever. Yeah. It's horrible scene.
Dude, the male gang, the Scars, there's all this weird shit with them where they're always like grabbing at each other and grabbing each other's crotches. And like, there's all this, I'd go as far as to say there's all this like homoerotic weird stuff going on with them.
One of the second in command guy kisses Jake like right on the mouth when they're like about to take off or something like that.
Yes.
And Jake's like, no, I can't stay mad at you for that.
And then they start laughing at each other. But it's there's all this weird, and I guess it's meant to throw the viewer off guard. Like, what are these guys about? These guys are unpredictable. They're very weird. They're dangerous.
I don't know. I don't understand this gang very well, to be honest. I really don't, because there's three of them are adults that are not in high school.
Right.
And the only reason they're hanging around the high school is that like one young guy, I want to say Vinny or something, like Vince. Yeah, Vinny. Yep. That they're trying. And by the way, a kind of comically short guy compared to like three tall, somewhat buff guys. At least two of them are pretty buff, and like they're all tall. It's just, what is this gang about? Like, what do they want to do? They're not a motorcycle gang, They don't do robberies. I don't know. Like, they're not in beef for like their corner over against another gang. Like, I don't understand what the goal of this gang is.
Yeah. I honestly, man, I think that the only attempt they make at explaining anything is that they're selling drugs to kids at the school, because they have that run in with the one kid in the hall,
That's right.
and they're like,
I
give us
forgot.
our cash or our blow back. So they mentioned cocaine. And then, dude, Dean Warner from Animal House shows up. John Underwood, the actor.
John Vernon?
John. Oh, I'm
Isn't it
sorry.
Vernon?
John Vernon. He's Principal Underwood in this movie. You're
Yes.
correct. John Vernon. And he's a staple of like 80s movies as an authority figure.
This
He's great.
guy
He's
got
awesome.
paid, Jim. He's in like, I think 4 scenes,
Yeah.
not anything that actually influences the plot. He's just there as flavor. But his dialogue is beyond bizarre. Bizarre for a principal. But the dude hams it up and makes the scene his own every time.
Yeah.
He calls the gang the F word.
Yes.
I was like, no, they're pretty casual with that word in this movie.
That word's thrown around a lot. And so is the CUNT word.
Yeah.
A lot.
It's a different time, folks. Like,
Yeah.
That was not abnormal. It is now, but it wasn't then. So it just is what it is in that regard for a movie. But he tells the gang, like, to get out of the high school and to, I think, go F an iceberg.
Yes.
Something. And I was like, what's that mean?
You sick, Vince?
Yeah, man, he's got the clap.
Go fuck an iceberg. Now, why don't you take your asses out of here before I feed him to the cops?
Yeah, no.
And later, he's sort of like reprimanding Brenda, Linda Blair's character, and he's like, you get good grades, you have a pretty face, a good figure. And I'm like, what principal starts going into that?
You know, I don't understand it. You're a bright girl. You got a pretty face. A good figure.
Yeah, it's so odd. And I guess his reason for existing in the movie is like, well, he's an authority figure that we have to contrast with the kids.
Yeah.
You know? But
there's never a big scene where, say, the Satins rebel against authority. There's no scene where, say, he gets killed or beaten up by the Scars. You know what I mean? Like it is a necessary sort of character in a way, but it's weird how unimportant certain characters in this movie are. Everything at the school, not super important.
Yeah. And dude, to your point, Brenda and Heather's mother is in the movie. She's super unimportant to the story. She shows up at the hospital after Heather's assaulted, and Brenda and her mom are in the hospital room comforting Heather. Heather's unconscious. But the mom has no role other than basically being like, this is sad that this happened. And then she leaves the hospital room and Brenda is there alone. But
I don't think she ever shows back up in the movie.
She answers the phone later in the movie when one of the gang girls calls to let Brenda know that Francine was killed.
Right, because this is the next time. Like the Satins haven't even really struck back at the Scars, and the Scars escalate things again.
Yeah. Well, the Scars and the Satins have a confrontation at the nightclub.
Yeah.
Where the strangest 80s band is playing.
And also, like, the Satins
really
seem
odd
to have like this mentor character there that was never introduced. They're just like talking to a slightly older lady and she's like being sympathetic. And I'm like, who is this?
Yeah. I got the impression that she's the club manager or she's like the owner.
Oh, maybe.
Because at some point she tells one of the waitresses to do something. So I got that as like, oh, the kids are regulars at this nightclub. They know the manager or the owner, and she's this cool, hip, older woman who's like, probably like, hey, I used to be in a gang.
Nothing hipper than hanging out with like 17 and 18-year-olds.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's what I'm going to do when I'm going to start hanging out with 17 and 18-year-olds and giving them advice like, hey,
Yes.
you're
Yeah.
dealing with gang problems. I can tell you about what to do.
It's
But you're right. You're right. They have like a squabble at the nightclub,
yeah.
but it's not really an escalation.
Right. And at least in the nightclub, we get all the girls in their matching red leather, like official gang jackets, where
Right.
the first time you watch this, you might not get it. But when you get to that scene, it's like, oh, okay, they're an official gang, basically.
Right. It
Okay.
took me a while to realize, like, I thought that, yeah, they were just friends, but no, technically they are a gang. This is like a gang movie.
Yes. Yeah. Although Brenda's the only really proactive one in the gang. I mean, she gets revenge. I mean, not to jump forward, but she gets revenge on her own at the end of the movie. It's just her versus the scars at the end. That's
Right. We're
sort of
almost
it.
there, but I do want to say one more thing about the club that amused me. It's a total coincidence that the Scars went to that club. Like they didn't like stalk the Satins or anything. They just like go into a club and they're like, "Oh my god, hey, look, it's them." And I was like, LA, famously tiny town, like not many clubs to go to, and they both end up at the same one.
Yeah, that's just a freak occurrence. That's,
you don't think about it in the context of the movie. I'm definitely like doing a nitpick there, but it is a little funny that like there's no reason for them both to be there and they just happen to be.
Yeah. Chris, before we move on, I wanted to bring something up, which is we always sort of mention like filler in these movies, time filler, and because, that has to happen basically. What were your thoughts on the bizarre poetry scene at school?
Disco sucks. Punk is dead. Give me rock. Well, give me head.
Oh yeah.
With
yeah, that's right. Like there's a teacher. Jim's talking about a poetry scene. Go ahead.
The pregnant girl, Francine, it's her boyfriend Richie.
Yeah.
And he's like, this isn't poetry. And the teacher's like, tell us what you think poetry is. And he's like, disco's dead, punk sucks, rock and roll, give me head, or something. And the teacher's
it
like,
does end with like, give me head.
Yeah. And the teacher writes it on the blackboard and is like, let's break this down and analyze it. This actually is poetry. And then
it goes on though. It just keeps going.
That's why I'm bringing it up. It's like, oh, they needed to fill up like 3 or 4 minutes here in the movie. Yeah. And Linda Blair, Brenda's in the scene, but she's just sitting and sort of looking out the window. She's just kind of like not involved, but it's this odd scene showing that the female teacher is kind of hip and is like, we can talk about sex, you guys. It's okay.
Hey, kids, let's rap.
It's very odd.
It is because yes, it seems like something that would be inappropriate to talk about, and on some level you're like, oh, if this was like an inner city sort of school, then I mean, props to the teacher for breaking something down on their level. Except the school seems kind of nice,
right? Yeah.
It's like there is in the Satins like a Mexican American gang member and an African American gang member, but the rest of the school seems pretty damn white.
Yeah.
And where we see the characters, like, even though Brenda's in a gang and Vinny's in a gang, they're coming from pretty nice houses with like parents and stuff. Like they're not in a bad section of town.
Yeah.
That's a little weird too.
I was going to mention that Brenda drives a nice new car, like a little prototype, cool little SUV thing. And when she pulls up to her house, it's a nice house. It's like a suburban house.
Maybe that's intentional. Yeah. Like that was sort of like, hey, even though your kids and your life seems, perfect and you're middle America's suburbia, they could be in a gang.
Yeah.
Because this is a little bit fear mongering. Let's like be honest. Like the idea of like gangs can be anywhere and they're going to kill you if they see you. They're not just going to harass you. They're going to kill you.
Yeah. I mean, holy shit. That's the entire theme of Death Wish 3, which we'll be talking about. But it's like, there's just gangs crawling out of manholes and sewers.
I can't wait to get to how over the top that one is. But this is over the top, but it's on a smaller level, but it's worth mentioning. Some of that is because this movie almost completely fell apart. They ran out of money and had to shut down for a little while, and a new investor came in and brought in some more money, so they were able to complete it. And you can't really see that on screen. It's not like some scenes look one way and some scenes look another way. That isn't what we're saying, but like behind the scenes, this movie basically had a really hard time getting funded.
Yeah, I could see that.
And it's smaller in scale.
Yeah. Also, man, like, I wonder, when I watch these movies, we talk about like all the behind the scenes stuff. And I wonder, like, I think Linda Blair is actually a great protagonist in this. She's going for it, but she's also terrible at the same time. And there's moments where she's so silly and over the top that I'm like, she has to be aware that she's in a B movie, right? Like, this she's hamming it up. She's going for it. She knows that this is like straight to VHS.
She talks with an accent like she's tough, but she doesn't really look so tough.
Oh my God, dude.
it's a little funny.
Before we get into her at the end getting her revenge, I did want to mention, like, the only girl in her crew that does get killed is this pregnant girl, Francine. And it's kind of a horrific thing where she gets chased down by the scars and thrown off a goddamn bridge.
Yeah, like Jake power lifts her. And the other guy, and he's like, he's deciding. He's like, that's his moment. He's like, he can't decide. And then like the guys are like, do it. And he's like, okay. He tosses it.
And Vince, the new recruit, loses his shit and freaks out and like runs and basically is like, I'm done with you crazy assholes, you know? And Vince goes to the hospital and confesses to an unconscious Heather what happened. Linda Blair, Brenda, just so happens to be walking in and being like, oh, you just confessed to my sister's assault. Now I know who did it.
They didn't have a chance. They went this time. No!
Thanks. Yeah.
So very convenient plot devices, but
it is kind of funny. Like, she hadn't put it together yet who did it, because there's only like one bad gang in this whole movie. There's no suspects. You know what I mean? Yes. But yes, I like all of a sudden I was like, oh, she didn't know that they did it already? Huh. Okay, right. Yeah. I guess not, but okay.
It's pretty wild, man. And then my favorite thing is Brenda goes home and actually puts on her like superhero vigilante outfit, which we've seen.
No, dude.
We've seen her wear leather. We've seen her wear studded stuff, but
we've seen her wear nothing.
We've seen her wear nothing in the tub. But this outfit in particular, man, is like the official vigilante outfit, like the zip up, sexy black leather.
It's Black Widow
studded belt, and it's hilarious and awesome. It's the most 80s thing you could witness. It's great. It's right. Beautiful.
She gets dressed at home, and I guess she then goes to that what do you call it, the army surplus store, and takes things like the bear trap and the crossbow and stuff. Yeah, but she only has to go after 3 guys, not 4.
Yeah, she confronts Vinny at his home, gets the information she needs out of him, including the fact that Francine is dead. She didn't know that. Now she knows. She lets Vinny go, and then she goes after Jake, Fargo, and Red. I did it, Chris. I remember the stupid names of these idiot gang members.
Fargo, Red, so generic, but okay.
Is it Argo or Fargo? I think
so.
Okay, yeah. And they're all
but those guys kill Vinny.
Jake runs over Vinny with his car and kills him, while Red and Argo or Fargo, whatever, confront Linda Blair. And she's playing this game of like cat and mouse with them in this warehouse.
I bet you can't find me. Am I over here? Or am I over here? Can you find me? It's like, it's almost like Batman, but it's also a little bit like, I bet you can't find me.
Yeah.
Brenda, we're going to play a little game, baby.
I just love fun and games.
I was just going to say, is she suddenly Batman or the Creeper? Or she's like laughing maniacally, and we see that she's even recorded her own voice and had it set up on a shelf in the warehouse.
Know! She set up like so much. She planned for this like Batman.
Yes.
They finally are like, gotcha! And then it's like a tape recorder and like, huh?
Yeah.
And this humongous generic warehouse. I don't know what kind of a warehouse, just a warehouse.
Yeah.
Oh, although, was the warehouse where the gang actually hung out? I think
shoot.
I
Maybe.
think that's what happened is she knew where the scars were based out of, because we saw them a couple times getting out of like a warehouse, like to go out on the town.
Oh, yeah. Okay. That makes sense.
That only just came to me. But yeah, so anyway, and this is the part where there's some violence. It was decent.
Yeah. Taking out these dudes with a crossbow. And I definitely want Jamie to play this where we get her incredible one-liner of like, it's too bad you're not double jointed.
Too bad you're not double jointed.
Why?
Because if you were, you'd be able to bend over and kiss your ass goodbye.
Because then you could bend over and kiss your own butt goodbye, something like that. We'll play it. But and then she takes out Fargo with a arrow through the throat. And then Chris, how disappointed were you when Red's death is off screen?
Now it's your turn with the pussy.
No. No.
Yeah.
What?
I guess he just ran into the bear trap or something like that, fell into it.
It shows her shooting an arrow at him as well, but it's we don't see the arrow hit him.
I thought one of them like fell into a bear trap, but like we don't see it.
I don't think so. When Argo is walking through one of the hallways of the warehouse, he sees the bear trap on the ground.
Right.
And is like, oh, you're trying to catch a bear and that kind of thing. And
right.
I don't think we see it activate.
Okay. I thought that Red fell headfirst into that trap at some point, like off camera. I thought that they came across it when he was lying down with like headfirst in the bear trap.
Oh shit, you might be right, actually. Yeah.
I'm pretty smart.
Because we see the aftermath of Red and Argo's death in the warehouse when Jake shows up.
Yeah.
And discovers their bodies, and they're pretty mangled up. They're pretty, bloody.
She's a good shot, isn't she?
Yeah.
Maybe that would have been something that they could have been doing at school, like archery or something, to indicate what her skill level is instead of jazzercise. Yeah.
There's no setup for her being good at any sort of weaponry or training.
Great at it.
Yeah.
Like, what if she worked? What if they, when they had their conversations, instead of being in the gym class, they were in, say, like, audio visual, and she was like really good at like recording or something. You know what I mean? Like set up that she's got some of these skills.
Yes. No, we don't have time for that, Chris. We don't have time. But dude, how great of a shot is she when she gets 2 arrows from long distance into Jake's legs? I mean, we don't even see her, and she's shooting from half a mile away directly into Jake's legs, taking him out, man.
Right.
And then she sets a trap for him. And the final confrontation with Jake is actually pretty cool because she's like, she wants it to last longer.
No, Jake, you didn't get me. But I'm definitely gonna get you.
No!
And she's like taunting him, and she wants him to suffer.
Almost her critical mistake. Almost.
She gets herself into trouble. Yeah.
Because Jake was able to struggle back through the pain. They fight. And what does she throw on him? Like a paint can?
Yeah, flammable, I guess, oil-based paint. Because the one building, Chris, she conveniently breaks into, fully stocked hardware store.
Right.
And grabs a can of paint that blatantly has a huge sign that says flammable. She douses Jake with the entire gallon of the paint and then gets her lighter to work, and he goes up in flames. You know?
Yeah. Again,
So-
like establish this stuff. Establish her lighter and her, I don't know, whatever.
Yeah, I know. It's like,
I guess I just feel like, hey, maybe you don't think of it on the first draft, but by the time you finish, you're like, oh, the character needs to have X, Y, and Z skill to overcome their obstacles. So now let's go back and seed that in the story and in a way where it's covered up by exposition. So you're not thinking about it. I know I'm thinking too hard about how to improve this movie. This movie doesn't need to be improved. It is what it is.
yes. And the thing is, man, I've seen this a couple of times. I always have fun watching this movie. Like, it is super silly. It's trash B movie cult classic kind of thing. What did you have fun? Like, what were your thoughts?
I liked the third act quite a bit once Brenda decides to get revenge. And it sort of had me going like, oh, I kind of wish that they'd just sort of gotten there faster and maybe had a bigger gang for all the Satins and Scars to go up against. Like, but that becomes a very different, more expensive movie. I get that.
Yeah.
What I thought was strange, Jim, was for a movie with so much sort of trauma of, like horrible things happening to people, we surprisingly spend a lot of time on how Vinny is dealing with the effects of this as compared to Brenda. And I'm like,
Yes.
why are we focusing so much on Vinny's pain instead of Brenda's pain? Very strange decision to me. Like, to try to make this bad guy like sympathetic, fine to a degree, but the main character should be dealing with those emotions a lot more.
I agree. Because, man, I have the note. It's a question, but it's like, is Vinny the most developed character in the movie?
You do? Yeah. Isn't that strange? Like, how much time they give him?
What?
Since they do
Yeah.
kind of kill him off pretty quickly in the third act.
Yeah.
He's the most conflicted character. Like, Brenda doesn't really change. She's already tough at the beginning of the movie. And she just, once she learns what she needs, like, who hurt her sister, she's ready to go.
Right.
So there's not much of a character arc there is all. It's fun.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it is kind of funny. Like, there's no big internal conflict over what she should do.
Right. Right. And at the end of the flick, we get the girls dressed in their Sunday best visiting the grave of Francine.
Yeah.
And
Heather's all better.
Yes. And dude, speaking of Heather, I have a deep cut to reveal here.
Okay.
So let's keep this. Heather's character in this movie, it's a shared universe. Because of the trauma she experiences, her character becomes trash in Return of the Living Dead. You knew where I was going with this.
I did.
And she herself becomes a punk. She embraces the
She becomes a
trauma and the
gang member.
punk nature. And she winds up spending the rest of her days dancing naked on tombstones.
Yes. That's a fun movie. Very
That's a great
bleak ending. Although
That's a
the
great
sequels
movie.
kind of wipe it out.
Dude, what was with the 80s? It just, everything was so nihilistic. Like, everything was just...
It is interesting. These days,
You
I
know.
feel like you get that with European horror movies.
Yeah.
They have no problem going bleak, whereas we tend to nowadays have happier endings, even in horror films. Not always,
Yes.
but sometimes.
Yeah.
It's an interesting angle on. You can totally read the subtext of this, going, these were middle America's fears. Like, the gangs could be anywhere, even in nice high schools. That was the fear.
Got it. Yeah. I mean, you're right. It's that
But compared to the
era,
fears of like what
Reagan
Sorry.
era paranoia, man, between everyone thinking that World War III could break out at any time, to communism, to Russia, to punks, to
a lot of fears.
drugs,
fears.
ghetto crime, whatever,
I
pick your
know.
poison,
I know. you look back sometimes and you're like, oh, there's so many problems today. Like it was an easier time. And you're like, it wasn't. Like every era has its own stresses and stuff.
Right.
And then if you look at these movies with like the hindsight of 30 years, 40 years, yeah, you start to see like what people used to be afraid of that like is like, yeah, probably still a thing, but isn't like, we don't have time for that now because now the world is melting, things like that.
Yes. Yeah. We got other fish to fry.
I appreciate that you introduced me to this one. It was pretty bonkers.
Good.
It was, and I think you could even argue that while I say that the main character doesn't go through a character arc, it was probably still more grounded and realistic and about something than my choice.
Let's go for it.
Death Wish 3. And I went straight for the third one here, Jim, because it's the crazy.
I know. I know.
Let me
What can
explain
you
this
say?
for viewers real quick. The first Death Wish is definitely exploitation, but it gives us this guy, Paul Kersey, older guy played by Charles Bronson, married, has like, an adult daughter. They're in New York. He's not a tough guy. He was a conscientious objector, I think, or like a medic or something like that during the Korean War.
Mm-hmm.
So he's got a little, but now he's an architect. He's an architect.
Yep.
When a random gang, including Jeff Goldblum, murder his wife and assault his daughter, he just goes crazy and just starts killing gang members.
Mm-hmm.
But that's at least a story. And the second one, they sort of remake it. Now he's in LA. He's got a new girlfriend, but now his daughter gets assaulted and killed. And so he goes on the revenge spree again. But
and
it's the same movie.
Their maid also gets assaulted and murdered.
That's right, the maid. In this one, Death Wish 3, I don't know if they ever even mention really his job. We don't have time for his job. We don't have time to get to know his relationship with the close people that happens. Bronson is just like on a bus back to New York. It's been 10 years. He's coming back to New York to see an old war buddy. The war buddy has been, by like minutes before he gets there, the war buddy gets killed by the local gang. So we never even get the connection of like losing someone close to him. Like they never have a single scene talking.
Poor Charlie. That's the buddy, Charlie.
So it's just bonkers. Like it just skips all the sort of character building and exposition and just gets right to things.
Yeah.
And this gang is like a goddamn army, Jim. Like just hundreds of gang members.
It's insane. Dude, we didn't mention the most obvious thing. This is a canon movie.
This is canon.
This is 1985. This is the peak of their supremacy of the B movie superiority. I mean, this is
because canon basically, if folks don't know, there's a great documentary out there called Electric Boogaloo.
Yeah. The story of Canon, the true story of Canon Pictures or something.
Such a good documentary.
It's awesome.
They basically would take sort of B movies and give it a little bit more money than the average person. They put some good funding behind B movie stuff. And for a while they had a lot of success. Like this movie was financially successful, but it's so like it's comical. Like the idea of like how gangs have taken over New York and everybody's at risk, like they're crawling into your windows every night trying to steal things.
This movie is a cartoon. It is a straight up cartoon. Whereas the first ones, and I just wanted to say a quick thing about the historical context, which is the first Death Wish came out in 1974. And this was like the beginning era, the mid to late 70s of the dark vigilante movies. And even Quentin Tarantino said, like, without the first Death Wish movie, you don't have Taxi Driver.
Right.
So the first one was this kind of critically acclaimed, dark, interesting, something different. And Charles Bronson was the guy to pull off this role. And then by the time you get to just part 3, man, it's just a straight up cartoon.
I mean,
it's crazy.
he's 10 years older. So Bronson's, I will give him credit. He's in shape, but he's old.
Yes.
By the way, they made 2 more after this, but like tiny budgets, like just
I know.
not worth watching. Not worth watching.
I've never seen 4 and 5, but now I do want to watch them.
They're not.
You're shaking your head. No. Should I?
They're not going to give you this experience.
Okay. Few things will, Chris. Few things will.
Is the gist of the plot real quick, and then we can go into like, well, I'll give the gist of the plot, and then we can talk about our favorite parts or our big thoughts, anything behind the scenes, etc. So Paul Kersey shows up to New York, and his friend is dead. The police arrest him because he's on the scene, and they've heard that there was a commotion, and he gets arrested. But the police chief knows who he is. I mean, all the cops basically do. They're like, "Oh, you're Mr. Vigilante."
10 years, Mr. Vigilante. Last damn thing I need is a vigilante.
But he's like, "But here's the thing. I'm having such a hard time with gangs. I'm going to release you and let you do your thing, but you work for me."
You want out of here? You got it. I'll minimize the vigilante stuff with the press. Tell them it's creeps killing creeps. Nobody cares anyway. It'll be just like before, Mr. Vigilante. With one important difference. You're gonna work for me.
Like you unofficially report to me. You basically get to go kill people off the books, etc. And he does. Paul also makes friends with all the older people that live in his late friend's building, and he just sets up shop in his dead friend's apartment until it finally builds to a confrontation with all the townspeople, mostly Charles Bronson, and the cops and everybody against just gangs that are just crawling out of every building you could imagine. Just chaos. We're talking like it escalates to Charles Bronson at the end is using 50 caliber machine gun against them and a rocket propelled grenade or something like that.
Yes.
Like just total chaos. And that's all it is, and he just kills them and it's over.
Yeah.
But within that, we can break down some of the scenes that we enjoyed, right?
but I just want to let all of our viewers know, I just want to stress the fact again, if you didn't get Chris's point, you guys, the police allow Charles Bronson to go onto the streets and murder people.
Yeah.
They allow this to happen. And in most of the scenes, the punks have knives or clubs or bats or whatever. He has a gun and just safely from a distance aims it at them and brutally murders them. It's
Jim,
insane.
you're right. It's insane. It's so unfair. Like it's so crazy. Like how much we're meant to hate the gangs because everybody we meet is on Bronson's side. Mm-hmm. Police Chief Stryker, an assistant district attorney named Catherine Davis. She's like, somebody really should just take care of them. All the neighbors, all the people, like everybody supports him literally killing people. And in many cases, it's like, say like a snatch and grab purse guy. Like we'll like run by and grab a purse. No violence there. And like Charles Bronson just happens to be there and he's like, not today, punk. And he just shoots him in the back.
Yes.
And that's our hero. He is just literally allowed to indiscriminately kill these guys that most of the time have no chance of like fighting back against him because they don't have a gun or something like that.
Yeah.
And he just kills them. And everybody on every level of society is like, thank you for your service. Thank you so much. And it's like, there's never a discussion with the police or the district attorney of, hey, we need to, get these people rehabilitated, or we need to put them in court so that the families that are their victims can have some closure and peace of mind and know what happened. None of that. They're just like, no, you're any level of criminal, you're dead.
Yeah. And man, the batshit nature of this movie, this made me laugh out loud, is when Bronson moves into the neighborhood, he rents a PO box and
Yes.
starts ordering guns and weapons and having them shipped to him at this PO box, and he's unveiling these gorgeous, large, crazy, amped up guns in front of the
Loving shots.
neighbors. In front of the
camera,
neighbors, like, we got this now.
and the
We could
camera
stop an
lingers.
elephant.
The camera lingers on every weapon introduced to him. Like at one point, his new friend, who was like, friends with his old friend, he's basically like the same guy. He's like, I also fought in the war. He's like, Charlie, your friend, left this, and he opens, like a closet, and he's got a 50 caliber machine gun, which is a ridiculously large military grade weapon, like nothing you would use on the streets. And anytime there's that, or like you say, he gets something in the mail, like, a big handgun, the camera's just like, oh, look at how glorious this is.
Yeah. It's pure 80s violence and like Rambo-esque style, like glorification, where, like you mentioned earlier, Bronson towards the end of this movie is running through the streets with this machine gun with the bullet straps, and he has an assistant guy feeding the bullets into the gun as he mows down armies, groups of these gang members, man.
Dozens at a time.
He's mowing them down.
Dozens at a time.
It is wild shit.
Before it's even 7 minutes in, Paul Kersey, the main character, has shown up. His friend is dead, and he's in the police station meeting Schreiker. That's how fast, because you've got time. You've got to have the credits and everything, and establish like that there are gangs. Establish that he's coming to New York to meet a friend, and by 7 minutes in, that friend is dead, and it's enough to motivate Paul Kersey to want to kill again. He briefly gets to meet the leader of the gang because they're both in like a central lockup. And the main bad guy is pretty entertaining. I'd say he's more charismatic and interesting than Jake.
Yes.
But also, he was an actual actor, and I don't have his name in front of me, but he was in a bunch of movies. He was actually...
He's in Willow. He's in Willow as the bearded... red-haired, bearded, like he's a legit actor. He was
Richie Cunningham's older brother Charlie for the first season of Happy Days, who just sort of disappeared after the first season. They never mentioned him again, but he was a cast member for that first year. If you see him and you're like, okay, wait a minute, he does look familiar, and he's got a reverse mohawk. He's got like the strip. He's got a unique look because he's tall. He's got kind of like very clear eyes. And the hairdo and everything, and the red hair, he's visually distinct, and he's a psychopath. He's completely a psychopath. But yeah, like it's just bonkers how like Schreiker just immediately is like, I know who you are, do your thing, but you work for me. He literally says that. Oh, and before he even tells him that he works for him, I believe he cold cocks him right across the face while he's like imprisoned and says, I get to violate your rights.
And I'm the law. That means I get to violate your constitutional rights.
Yeah. Wow.
What do you think about the love interest?
Well, speaking of padded scenes and tacked on stuff, it was like, Charles Bronson is also a lover. He's not just a cold killer. He's a lover as well, folks. It's like super. I liked her. I liked her character, but it was this tacked on thing of like, oh no, this poor woman is going to die horribly. She has to. She's
just into him though from the beginning. She's just like, Mr. Kersey, like, here's my number, like you're getting out of prison. Here's my number. And then she's like stopping by going like, I just thought you were interesting. I want to talk to you. He's like, yeah, most ladies would, He doesn't say that, but, and they sleep together.
Yeah. Well, Chris, first, very important. She invites him over and she cooks him chicken, which he loves chicken.
I love chicken. Who doesn't? Yeah. And he's like, at least twice her age, just to be clear. Like he just is. He's just old.
Yeah.
That's why there's never really any fight scenes, like fisticuffs. It's all with guns. You know, he just gets the drop on someone, and that's it. The characters in his apartment that he stays at are all pretty developed. There's a retired older Jewish couple. There's like his friend's war buddy who's just sort of, you know, like kind of like becomes his new best friend. And then there's a young couple, like a black guy and his supposedly like something like Puerto Rican wife. But that woman is Star Trek's Deanna Troi, just in like sort of a brown face makeup. And that actress, Marina Sirtis, said she despises this director.
Yeah. Michael Winner is his name. He's apparently total scumbag.
He sounds like he was an asshole to people on set.
Yeah.
And really not nice to ladies. Like, you know, he made them get topless and get assaulted in these scenes and had like no real empathy and like, hey, let's have a smaller set or like talk through, like, you know, you just go do your scene, you know?
Yeah.
And you're like, this is a lot to do.
Yeah. It's funny, man. I sorry to interrupt, but I watched a quick interview with Alex Winter about this because Alex Winter from Bill and Ted's is in this movie as one of the gang members.
Yeah.
And he was talking about how Michael Winter had this like system of hierarchy on the set where he treated Charles Bronson like gold and did anything that Bronson wanted and was super respectful and had a car service for him so that Bronson could literally get into a car and drive like 2 blocks down the street to set, all this weird shit.
I can't walk
yeah, it's like, but if you were one of the punks or one of the, you know, female characters, it was like he didn't give a shit about anybody else. It's really weird.
Yeah, he doesn't sound like a great guy at all. So maybe some of that like sort of negativity, I think like sort of shows on screen. Like this is a really mean-spirited movie on some level.
Mm-hmm.
It's a mean-spirited movie because it just like does mean things to the main character out of nowhere to motivate him.
Yeah.
Because at one point he's kind of like ready to sort of walk away from it. He's like, I've killed enough people this week.
Yes. Yeah.
I can't even do my impression without like giggling. He's like, I've killed enough people, Assistant DA Catherine Davis. I think now that we've made love, tell you what, let's go get some pancakes at 3 a.m. And I'm also going to pick up a new gun from my post office box.
Exactly.
Which is literally what they do.
You know, when as soon as you see him leave her in the car and they look at each other with kind of a cutesy look, you're like, oh no, she's going to die. Like, oh, why is he leaving her? Oh shit, I know where this is going. And then she does die. The punks show up and punch her and put the car in neutral and roll it down a hill. And it crashes into another car and like splits that car in half.
And then explodes.
Yeah.
You've been to New York more than a few times, Jim, right?
Yes.
Those famous Manhattan Hills that we've got.
I know. I was going to say this ain't filmed in New York.
That's what I was getting at. This was filmed in London. And aside from a few establishing shots, I'll be honest, it's not the most convincing New York you've ever seen. It just isn't. They've got a humongous set for like that apartment building and the block around it, but it's clearly a set. It doesn't quite, because it's like almost triangular, and I've never really quite seen something built that way in New York. It's very blocky, you know, not triangular for the most part. There are a few, but not like the way this is with apartment buildings and everything. And you don't see the New York skyline in the background of any of these shots. You know what I mean?
Not at all.
You see the New York skyline. And then, like we say, they're in Manhattan when the punks roll the car down the hill. And I like pause and I go, I can't think of anywhere in New York that has much of a gradient, like certainly not a big hill.
Yeah. It's like your brain knows that it's not New York when you watch it, but they do a good job of like conveying the absolute grittiness of this city they've established. And I also had a note, Chris, with like in this movie and the other movie, it's like graffiti equals bad.
I know. And
Equals,
there's never, who do they get to do that graffiti? Because I'll tell you something. I don't think that they tend to hire actual graffiti artists who would like probably make something they were proud of and like cool.
Yeah.
It's very generic. It'll be like, democracy equals stupid. It'll just be sayings and like very straight letters.
Yeah. Or just like in the background, it just says like kill or spit or something. It's like very generic. It's like, oh, the art director. The art director.
I'm sorry, Jim. The idea of it just saying spit.
It's true. It's true. It's like
this is what kids do, right? They vomit.
No, I mean, seriously, it's like an out of touch art director who's like, we have to set dress this. What do we write? Like destroy the anarchy symbol, a little skull, all the cliche things that it's silly. It stands out to me because
it totally
I appreciate good tagging. I appreciate good graffiti work, murals. I'm not interested in defacing people's private property in that way, but there's an aesthetic to these 80s movies where it is just like graffiti means rough
graffiti
neighborhood.
Equals trouble. What's funny is in this movie there's some Home Alone parts to it. Basically here and there, like, people have been breaking into this apartment building. And so Charles Bronson's like, I'll help. And he makes these ridiculous things like nails on a board right underneath a window. And sure enough, like somebody one night like tries to break in and just steps on it and is like, ow. Or the best one is like some sort of weird wooden plank with a nail here. And it's like a mouse trap. It's like it extends back. And when somebody steps in, it goes whoom and like right up to somebody's head. And I think they use that twice.
They do, because he sets that up in the elderly Jewish couple's apartment. And we don't see it, but we see the aftermath where there's some teeth stuck to the board.
What's that? And he's like, teeth. He's like happy about it.
Yeah.
Teeth.
He's proud of himself.
He really should be going around at this point, Paul Kersey, with like people's teeth and ears and stuff. Cause I don't think we can oversell how many people he kills. Like I didn't add it up, but if you told me 100, I'd believe you.
Right.
And I mean, we haven't gotten there yet. It's still kind of like onesies and twosies and stuff, but eventually, I mean, I don't know if it's even worth breaking down everything. Eventually, just like, the gang decides to lead an army type assault on the little apartment building.
Yeah.
But Paul Kersey is prepared for this moment, and they all fight back.
And before we get to that, man, can I say one of the super cartoonish things that happens? So much of it is cartoonish, but when he's still taking out punks one at a time, there's a scene at night where he, shoots one of them in the back as his typical style.
Right.
And the whole neighborhood, we see shots of the buildings and there's people looking out the windows, all applauding. And it's like the whole city, the whole neighborhood is just pro Bronson and is cheering him, shooting these kids basically. And it's just so silly and cartoonish.
They are kind of kids. They are like, maybe they're in their early 20s, but most of these people are really young, the gang members. And you'd think that even if you didn't like someone, if somebody was like murdered, that sounds like it would be traumatic. But instead, you're right. Like everybody's always like, awesome, nailed it. Wow, good move.
And then eventually all of those people get guns towards the end of the movie. They somehow are
they're all armed somehow.
Back. Yeah.
They're all sort of like, it's time. And, like to pull out their cabinets. There's like a montage of like, just people arming themselves. Some of these scenes are so sort of mean. It's like, there's a scene in this where Paul just wants to kill someone, I guess. So he goes and he buys a camera, a nice Nikon camera, and just like loosely hangs it over his shoulder and just walks the street. And sure, somebody runs up and grabs it and he shoots them. And that's one of the big scenes you're talking about where like the whole town is like,
that's right. Yeah.
Night. But he set that up. That is premeditated. That is premeditated. And everybody cheers it on. I want to talk about how mean-spirited one thing is too. So Rodriguez's wife, the one played by Marina Sirtis, gets assaulted and they break her arm. So she goes to the hospital. And then all of a sudden, like the doctor is like, Mrs. Rodriguez has expired. And they're like, what? She only had a broken arm. They're like, yeah, it threw a clot that went into her heart and she just like died.
How's my wife? Can I see her?
Mrs. Rodriguez has expired.
Over the phone, they told me she had just a broken arm.
The arm was badly injured. There were broken blood vessels. Some clots came free and, we think, lodged in the heart.
And you're like, oh my God, that's horrible.
Yeah. And the husband is obviously devastated and like doubles over in the hospital and is crying, and Bronson's just kind of standing there. But it's like, oh my God, this is the worst case scenario of what could happen.
And so I guess that just motivates Rodriguez to, handle the bullets later.
That's right. Rodriguez is the one who's the bullet strap assistant to Bronson. Wow.
So the bad guy's name is Fraker, not that it really matters, but there are some cool 80s scenes where like he's using an Uzi. I was like, oh, that's 80s.
Yes.
But we're at the final point. You know, we're not quite an hour in, and you just get like about a 30 or 40 minute super extended action scene of just everybody fighting everybody.
Yeah.
And every time like 30 guys are gunned down by like a 50 cal, you cut to another shot and they're like climbing out of the windows and over the rooftops. There's just more and more and more. They just want to give you any kind of action scene they had in mind.
Yeah. The last 20 minutes of this movie, man, are just full over the top ridiculousness. It's incredible. If you have your friends over to watch this on a Friday night, one of Jim's beer drinking Friday night movies, you guys will be hooting and hollering at how over the top and outrageous all of this is. It's insane. It's pure canon. It is. You can't describe it any other way. It's just holy
like
shit.
56 minutes in, fights have been going on for a minute or two, and like there's this awesome scene of a dummy being thrown off the roof of a building.
Yeah.
I loved it. I love a scene where I'm like, that's a dummy, but I don't care.
Obvious dummy. And it's, dude, one thing that pauses the movie for a second before the climax, the chief detective, the chief cop visits Bronson at his apartment and tells him something like, you need to slow down a little or something. And Bronson's like, these are like roaches. Like you can't just kill one. You have to kill them all. And then he just goes back to killing everyone, right?
Yeah, it was weird. It was like the police had some sort of concern, like if the general public knew that it was like one man doing this, it was like they were worried that somehow they'd think that they wouldn't need the police or that they'd all go out and do this. So they sort of give some light dialogue here and there to concerns like that. But then they just go right back to killing.
Yes.
So much killing.
Maybe that was just a padding, one of our trademarked padding scenes of,
I'm trying to sort of remember the logic of it, and because I don't have a note to like sort of explain that logic. Like you'd think that like all these deaths and assaults would have been the motivating factor, but it seems like the motivating factor for like the big assault is that they that new friend that Paul's made, Bennett, apparently he runs a taxi company. Hadn't really been mentioned, but they like the punks grenade that store and burn it down, and that's sort of like from there everything just goes crazy. You see like people on fire, you see like just dozens of people shot from rooftops with like 50 cals.
We get
dummies
some
thrown off roofs.
big ass explosions in this movie too.
Big explosions. You've got like his Home Alone traps are getting activated, and like people are getting like nailed through the forehead and stuff. Just crazy, and it sort of culminates with the cop Schreiker and Paul Kersey just like walking downtown like it's a Western, like just walking down the main street, just like shooting anyone that like pops up out of behind a car or something like that.
Yeah. And man, there are people that are shooting at Bronson and the cops, but like not even coming close to hitting them.
No,
so Bronson,
they're all terrible shots. He never gets wounded, does he?
No, he gets a dagger, but he's wearing in his side, but he's wearing a bulletproof vest. So he doesn't really
bulletproof, asshole.
Yeah. He doesn't really get much of a scratch in this movie. He's Rambo, basically. He's
beyond Rambo.
The Terminator.
As far as efficiency goes. Yeah. And anyway, look, they've basically killed like hundreds of gang members. Fraker somehow has a confrontation with Paul Kersey and Schreiker in the apartment building room, and Fraker, the bad guy, has the drop on them. I think he's even shot the cop, but then the cop distracts him, and Paul shoots him with a Law rocket launcher, a laser assisted something or other, like this humongous, like it looks like a bazooka. It's smaller. And he just shoots Fraker and just demolishes him in this humongous explosion.
Yes. And what's left of his flaming charred corpse when it hits the pavement is enough to scare all the gang members, and they all like walk away, and that's the end of it.
Yeah, they just they finally they somehow know that that's their leader.
They're done. They're done.
Like his charred corpse has fallen out of a building, and out of all this chaos, they just sort of know that like black husk is their boss somehow, and they're like, I give up. Never mind.
Yeah.
And then it is over. There is no sort of like time to mourn the dead or reset or anything. The cop is just like, I'll buy you a few minutes. Done.
Better get going. I'll buy you a few minutes. Get out of here.
Bronson's out. And dude, as Bronson is leaving the neighborhood, you see the shot of the neighborhood, and it's smoke, buildings on fire. And it's like, well, yeah, Bronson, I guess, solved the problem, but now your city's destroyed. Your neighborhood is destroyed.
This movie should have just been called Warzone, because that's all it becomes is like literally a war zone. It's so over the top compared to like what the gang problem was. They treat it like it's a military incursion.
Yeah. It's wild, man.
It's so funny, though. It's so funny. Jim, you said it best. You called it a cartoon, and that's the logic this one operates on.
Yeah, I'm just realizing, like, I would have loved to have seen a Bronson-Brenda team up.
Oh,
the two vigilantes from our two movies tonight. Like, how?
Absolutely.
Brenda becomes Bronson's little understudy. He's like, in your movie, you only killed 4 people. I killed 400 in the first 15 minutes of my movie.
Got to get those numbers up, kiddo. Those are amateur. Those are rookie numbers.
Yeah.
That's sort of what I mean by saying that, like, even though there wasn't a character arc for Brenda in Savage Streets, that's so much more relatable in a way that, like, she got revenge for her sister against, like, 3 people.
Right.
In this one, of course, we don't even know any of these characters. There's Fraker, the villain. I think there's one guy that they call the Giggler, but he's the one that steals the camera and gets shot in the back.
Yep.
Like, you don't know any of the... Well, you recognize Alex Winter.
Yeah, for sure.
He must have gotten killed, but I don't remember how.
Yeah, I mean, he
doesn't get a memorable death.
Trying to think. He definitely was killed for sure. It all blends together, man. That's the thing.
It does. Folks, it's so crazy how the final like 20 minutes is just like hundreds of people getting massacred. Yes. It is a war movie, not a gang movie. But I guess those were people's fears. You know what I think would have been cool is if this had been made in New York, you could have done things in iconic locations like a subway. You know, I think that would have been a great place to have had a gang making trouble.
Oh yeah, man. Yeah.
Or even just like, showing them like, ruining the New York Library or some museum or something like that. Something in Central Park, because that's the stuff they did in the first movie.
Yep.
But this movie's just left reality behind. This is
completely, man. And I even read that like Bronson was embarrassed of this movie. I mean, he kind of knew he was making a stinker. He probably did it for the money, but it's like, oh, they turned my character into Rambo. Like, this is so silly. But it's like, well, dude, the damage is done. You agreed to do the movie. I mean, it's canon. Like, what did you expect? They turned you into this old man, leather clad superhero. You're the Punisher. He
is. You say like, what did he expect? I mean, it was the same director. You know what I mean? So he might have expected it to still have some sort of groundedness, not knowing what's going on outside of him, but you still sort of know. And you know what? He still did 2 more that were even like lower budget and trashier. And he's even older. I remember seeing the poster for like the 5th one in something like maybe a comic book or maybe a magazine, and just like it really made me pause because the guy looks so old on the poster for Death Wish 5, and I was like, huh? Like what's this old man doing?
Yeah. It's crazy because when I told a friend of mine we were watching this one, he was like, "Oh, you mean Death Wish 3 starring Bronson and his toupee?" And I was like, "Oh, is that a total wig?" And in some of the scenes when he's running, his hair does kind of look like this weird, like hair helmet.
That's so interesting. I didn't think about it, but he has such a mop top that, like, oh, that could have. Did he have a toupee? Huh. Sometimes you can tell with certain actors, but
go back and watch the movie knowing that this is like a full wig.
That's what I'm going to watch it for next time. Jim, do you recommend either of these movies to people?
I recommend them both, actually, and I think it would be a cool double feature, but I think it needs to be taken as a silly, fun time with friends. There are these weird moments of assaults on people, like we mentioned, but I think these are both silly enough that you can watch it as a fun trash movie experience, man.
Well, I think that it's interesting to watch because it does give you the fashion and the emotions and fears of the 80s. So it's interesting on that level, even if that's not what it's directly supposed to be about. You definitely can't help but sort of pick up the vibe on some level. It's like it's a fake vibe, but you sort of there's a subtext that I think is easy to pick up on in both of these films. And I think that the fashion and the music and stuff is just part of the fun. And sometimes if you look closely, you might see some graffiti that says spit.
I'm telling you, man. I'm telling you. We're both children of the 80s, though. So it's like those things you mentioned, like especially the fashion and the styles and stuff, that does go a long way with me because I am looking at these things just aesthetically and feeding my own brain of like, oh, look at that. That's interesting. Or look at how outrageous and silly that is. So it works on a different level for me because of our age, I
agree. If we were looking at these and talking about how good is the performance or how good is the writing in terms of giving us an arc or any twists, I'd probably give both of these movies some pretty bad grades. But if you can just sort of enjoy it more as just like an action experience and more of an experience than like, a story, I think that it's entertaining on that level. And I think that's okay sometimes. I like serious movies. I like good movies. I just also sometimes like really trashy movies. I don't know what to tell you.
Yeah. I agree 100%. And that's why we're doing this show.
I love talking about it. I mean, I'll feel good just for laughing at your joke about graffiti. That one had me.
Oh, God.
Thank you.
Yeah. My pleasure, man.
I can't wait to do some more. We both have plenty of ideas, folks. Jim, you want to do some plugs?
I would love to. You guys, you can see my other YouTube show called Ink Pulp Live on Ink Pulp's channel. And it's me and Sean Crystal hanging out, drawing, talking craft, showing comic books that we're into. Super fun, interactive. We do a live stream on Wednesdays every 2 weeks. So check out my social media and links below for future dates for when we're doing episodes. And then another huge thing is by the time this video airs, the pre-launch page for my Kickstarter will be up. So again, link below, you guys. You can, sign up for the pre-launch of Defective Comics Presents Savage Street Vigilante, my one-shot comic. Crazy stuff that I'm doing here. Super excited about it. Kickstarter officially launches on October 1st.
That's
So,
awesome.
there we go.
I think that's
There we
good
go.
timing. By the way, folks, we did not decide to do street vigilante movies just to promote Jim's thing. I was the one that first suggested, let's do Death Wish 3. And Jim was like, hey, here's a good part. Here's something that would pair well with that. And
Yes.
he just happens to be doing this comic that's called Savage Street Vigilante, which seems very exciting.
Yes. Thanks, man. Yeah, it's just good synchronicity with all this stuff.
And I'll just also say the Ink Pulp, you and Sean have great chemistry. So like the
Thanks,
joking
man.
doesn't feel forced. You can tell that you guys are real friends. So you get both discussion of comic book craft and you get like humor that never feels forced. It's really good. And the chat adds to it. So also props to our editor, Jamie, who helps produce that show and choose comments and, gets beat up by you guys sometimes.
Yeah. No, I'm glad you shouted him out, Jazzy Jamie Wood. We couldn't do any of this without him. We couldn't do Trash Movie without him. Sean and I couldn't do.
Essential
when we live stream, we're keeping Jamie up till like 1 a.m. his time. And it's like, we're lucky to have him, man. He's awesome.
Well,
what do you got, Chris? What do you got?
Over on Comic Tropes, I was able to get an episode about Deadpool's history up just before the weekend. That was very important to me to get that SEO on Deadpool. Just sort of talking about Deadpool's first 10 years as he sort of developed, because most serialized superheroes, they rarely come out fully baked. Like some of the bones are there, but the successful ones, usually a couple different creators add to them. It's sort of an interesting dynamic within just Marvel and DC heroes. And I talk a little bit about that, and props I'll say to my sponsor for that episode, Rose City Comic-Con in Oregon. If you use the promo code TROPES, you can get $5 off your badge ticket at Rose City Comic-Con this year. So just wanted to shout that out. And aside from that, got some fun episodes coming up for that show. I can't wait. We've got some good ideas for this. And I'll just give another shout out to Punker Mike.
Yes.
Punker Mike,
yes.
One of our viewers, made Jim and I these amazing props, which look like, old-fashioned VHS rental.
So good,
tapes
man.
and stuff.
So good.
So, yeah. Punker_Mike at Instagram. We appreciate all of our viewers, but that was really nice of Mike to make us this stuff. That's so flattering.
Man.
So flattering.
He's part of the crew now, and I've got him making a promo video for me right now for Savage Street Vigilante, my Kickstarter. And I can't wait to see what he comes up with. I was just like, here's a bunch of art and ingredients, and then you just do what you want, man. Because I want you to. So, man, we have a cool extended family of things that are happening between comics, YouTube shows, creativity, Kickstarters. This year, I've really gotten into this idea of being more available and being more just out there, even if it's online, even if it's on YouTube. It actually works. And I've just met cool people and cool connections through doing it this way. It's exciting.
There's a great, I encourage a lot of people in the comics world that if they are up for it, push yourself out of your comfort zone, but doing videos or a podcast or something, it helps create a real community. And that just means I think that you're going to get some very loyal readers. And the readers will also potentially feedback and appreciate your podcast or your, streaming shows. I think that there's a really smart and kind community out there in comics. And you don't always see that in like social media posts that can be very adversarial. But things like this, I just want to say I really appreciate the kind comments that you all have below. I know we're just sort of talking off the cuff about other stuff than these movies, but I it's a good opportunity to thank people for that. And I think it's a great idea. I think the cartoonist kayfabe guys really showed how you can really build some dedicated viewers. And I think that you and Sean are starting to do something like that with Ink Pulp and hopefully shows like this. I really hope so.
Awesome. Thanks so much, man. And you have a great community on Mondays with, Weekly Spinner Rack as well. Like it's just,
I love talking about the news, comics
good
news.
Good people hang out, sharing a positive influence of what they're into.
Also, as long as we're thanking people, the folks over at Schraub Home Video, and at some point we're going to get Schraub in here to Schraub it up with us. We'll let him pick something.
Definitely. That would be amazing.
All right. I had a great time. Jim, you still got your T-square and your X-Acto knife. Just want to make sure that you're safe out there.
Dude, I'm...
Okay. And I've got just a regular ruler, but, and I've got a pair of scissors. So I think that, this is good. We're the trash movie gang, and nobody's going to mess with us.
This is how comics guys get gangster.
Yeah.
And on that note, thanks so much for joining us, you guys.
Keep it trashy.
Trash Movie Bonanza. Like and subscribe.